Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing my guide to dark romance. Alright guys, so as you can tell, I still do not have a voice. I am hoping one day it shall return. As of now, we're just gonna have to work with it. But anyway, I have recently been reading a lot of dark romance. I got into romance or dark romance around 2 years ago, and I figured it'd be nice for you guys to have a guide kind of about the different types of dark romance, also how dark certain books are, and like where to start when it comes to dark romance. So there's a decent amount of dark romance recs in this video, and I am so excited to talk about these books with you guys. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Patreon, and Goodreads, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about my guide to dark romance. So before I get started, I just want to say that reading is subjective, so this is personally my guide to dark romance. You might have a completely different take, and that is totally okay. So I just want to say that before I get started. But first up, we have beginner or like light dark romance. So this is still dark romance, still check all of the trigger warnings. However, I feel like these tropes aren't quite as dark, so we're not dealing with books that have like dubious consent or non-con or things like that. This is more of arranged marriage, captor-captive, and just not quite as dark. No graphic violence on page and things like that. So, starting off, definitely check out the Perfectly Imperfect Mafia Romance series. I feel like this series is great if you want to dip your toe into mafia romance. All of the books are pretty short. They have chronic illness and disability rep, and you will fall in love with the characters. Also, I just feel like these mafia romance books are not nearly as dark as a lot of other mafia books I've read, so just a great place to start in general when it comes to dark romance and mafia romance. Now, next up, I will say the Kingmaker series by Sophie Lark. Now, this series is slightly darker than Perfectly Imperfect. However, we're dealing with younger characters. So Kingmakers is essentially Harry Potter, but make it mafia. So all of these 18 and 19-year-olds are going to this university to learn how to be amazing mafia leaders. So they're learning how to make poisons, how to kind of like stalk people, how to just be great enforcers, and things like that. So overall, I love this series. It is a little bit darker than Perfectly Imperfect, but still not quite as dark as other series I've read. And finally, the Anti-Heroes in Love duet by Gianna Darling. Now, this particular duet is in a world that has a lot of very, very dark romance. However, I feel like Anti-Heroes in Love is probably the least dark out of all of them. I'm going to talk about the Enslaved duet at the end of this video because that's definitely the darkest. But Anti-Heroes in Love, it's just like a feel-good mafia duet. It has grumpy sunshine, except the heroine is actually the grump, and the hero, who is the mafia leader, is the sunshine. And it's just such a great mafia romance. And I feel like it's another one, if you're new to dark romance, it's not too intense, but still has a lot of those darker romance elements. And next up is kind of like middle of the road dark romance. This is personally my sweet spot. So these are dark romance books that might have the very upsetting scenes, sometimes detailed on page, very upsetting tropes, a little bit more dubious consent, non-con, things like that. But typically those events take place early in the book, and the rest of the book is the characters recovering, and there's normally a very beautiful story that comes out of it. So I have a lot for this section. First up, I have the Mind F series by St. Abbey. This is a serial killer series. There are audiobooks now available, which I am so happy about. But this series is following a serial killer, but she's kind of like a vigilante serial killer, and the FBI agent she is in a relationship with who's actually profiling her. So because this is a serial killer romance, there is a lot of like blood, not too much, not like a ridiculous amount of like gore and things like that. However, it is a little bit darker. Definitely check trigger warnings, but if you're a fan of Dexter, I feel like you'll really enjoy this book. And then next up, we have Gothicana, which is more of a forbidden, taboo, dark romance. Honestly, I feel like this is more dark romance because it's student teacher and it has those like gothic vibes. But overall, I love this story. So this is probably the least dark out of all of the ones I'm about to talk about. But this is following a girl that ends up being accepted into this university. And when she gets there, she realizes it's actually this like haunted, decrepit university that's completely isolated, that's ruled by a headmaster that she ends up having a relationship with. But there's also all of these weird paranormal things going on and a mystery they have to uncover. So overall, I love that book so much. Next up is one I recently read. Now, this is one of those books that has a very upsetting few chapters and some deplorable and horrible things take place. However, I feel like those things were necessary for the rest of the book to be as beautiful as it was. So it is Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. I picked this book up when I was first getting into dark romance and was like, this book is way too dark. However, it's so good. So we're following this girl who ends up getting, she's at a bar, ends up not having a ride home. So she calls her arch nemesis, who happens to be her sister's fiance, to come pick her up. And when he gets there, they both get abducted by a serial killer and are forced to remain in his basement and do horrible things, sometimes to each other. And then the aftermath of that is really the part of the book that stood out to me, and I just absolutely loved it. So that is a darker story. However, it also is a beautiful story. So next up, the last two books are actually by the same author. So we have Pam Godwin. So first up, we have Dark Notes, which is dark, and I honestly considered putting it in the advanced category. However, I feel like those really, really dark things take place pretty early on, and the rest of the book is about recovery, which is why I left it in this section. But Dark Notes is another forbidden romance. We're following this girl who has a horrible life. She is a pianist and is going to a school that she really can't afford in the hopes of graduating and becoming a famous pianist. Now she ends up getting a new teacher, and it's that teacher and her relationship. And essentially, our main character has been forced to sell her body in order to just survive in her world because, like I said, she has a horrible upbringing. So the teacher finds out about that and is not okay with it and brings her to live with him. And it's just their romance. And it's so, so good. And then last up is Sea of Ruin, also by Pam Godwin. This is actually a historical pirate romance. And it was the first Pam Godwin book I read. And also considered putting it in the next category because it is pretty dark, but also has a beautiful love story at its core. So it is following this girl, Bennett, whose mother is a lady of society, but her father is a notorious pirate. And when she is left an orphan, she decides to pick up her father's mantle and become a pirate herself. So we're really following Bennett as she is fleeing from her ex-husband. All we know about him is he is a pirate, and she ends up fleeing into the arms of a pirate hunter named Ashley, who is trying to find her ex-husband, and the story goes from there. And definitely check trigger warnings, but it's another dark romance that, although it does have some darker parts, overall, the story is just so, so good. And moving into advanced dark romance. Now, I want to preface this by saying there is another section after this, so don't be too intimidated. These are some of my favorite super dark romance books where they're just very, very dark. So a lot of things are happening on page. We're dealing with stalking, murder, captive, just a lot of very, very dark stuff. However, I love these books, and I've rated all of these books over 4 stars. So I wanted to share them. So first up, obviously, we have The Cat and Mouse Duet, Haunting and Hunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton. I feel like this is like the most famous dark romance. It is a stalker romance. We are following this girl who moves into her grandmother's dilapidated house, and soon after she gets there, she begins being stalked by a vigilante stalker, and it's so good, and I love the first book. I will say the second book is a little too dark for me. We're dealing with trafficking, and there's a lot of dark stuff, so know that going in, but the first book is just unbelievable. So then next up, I'm going to say The Ritual by Chantal Tessier, I believe. This is a secret society dark romance where there are these guys that are in a secret society in this college, and they have to remain abstinent, and they're essentially learning how to become murderers. And then at the end on their graduation day, they are given a girl that's like their personal girl for a year. And we're following one of those romances. So I haven't continued with this series, but the first book, so good. But check trigger warnings, once again, dubious consent, and just some really dark stuff. So overall, I really enjoyed it. It's not going to be for everybody. So next up we have Debt by Nina C. Jones. I thoroughly loved this book. It is so dark, especially the beginning. So we're essentially following this girl who wants to have a fantasy fulfilled and hires someone to fulfill said fantasy, and they show up, the deed is done, and the next night, another person shows up, and it's actually the person she hired. So who is that first person? And it turns out that first person actually has a history with the girl that he ended up kind of assaulting, and the story goes from there. So super dark. However, give this book a chance. It is so good. Okay, so last two. Next up we have The Enslaved Duet by Gianna Darling. This is a captor-captive romance, one of my favorites, unbelievably dark, and a lot of the acts take place on page, and our main character is a captive. So for the beginning of this book, she does not want what is being done to her. So just know that going in. Super dark, hence advanced category. But I did like the overall story, and it is a duet. So although the first book kind of has that non-con, the second book very much a romance with a lot of action. So we're following Cosima, who's this 18-year-old aspiring model, and she ends up being purchased by this British, not royal, but kind of like British nobleman, and she wakes up chained to his floor and is forced to like perform acts, and a romance does happen. Just believe me when I say there is an eventual romance, but the beginning is super dark. So overall, I love The Enslaved Duet. Another book, not going to be for everybody. And last up is Deliver, also by Pam Godwin. This is Captor-Captive. We're following this girl who was a captive herself and was taken and forced to learn how to essentially please whoever purchases her. So fast forward, she is now the person capturing like teenagers, and teaching them how to do the same thing. So super dark. However, there is a romance, and I loved this romance so much. So don't let the cover intimidate you. Although it is in the advanced category, it is honestly way less dark than The Enslaved Duet. But it's just a very interesting and enjoyable read. So I will definitely be continuing with the series. And those are all dark romances that I still think are worth giving a try. And next up, I want to touch on why choose dark romance. So both the books I'm about to talk about would definitely go into the advanced category. They are both pretty dark, but I still really enjoyed them. So if you're unfamiliar with Why Choose is one heroine with multiple male love interests. So it used to be known as reverse harem. We're getting away from that. Now it's called Why Choose. So first up, we have Heartless Heathens, which is by Santana Knox. It is my favorite dark Why Choose romance. It is kind of reminiscent of Hunchback of Notre Dame. We're following this girl named Romina who lives in a bell tower, and in her world, the church has taken over. So she is being ruled and controlled and held in isolation by Father Frollo, who is very high up in the church and actually controls this very big university. Well, these three heathens show up, and they are determined to take down the church, starting with Father Frollo. So they go to the bell tower, and that is where they find Romina, and they take her into their world. So that is a dark Why Choose romance that definitely is advanced. Lots of dark stuff happens on page. Torture, dubious consent, captor-captive, obviously. Like, there's a lot of stuff. But overall, I really enjoyed it. And then Malice, which is slightly darker. I believe it's by Cora Riley. This is a mafia dark Why Choose romance. We're following this girl who has been friends with a woman that's brothers are made men in the mafia, and they have this like secret meetup. They're just really good friends, and then one day that girl goes missing, and our main character ends up involved with her brothers and the mafia. And there's also a murder that has to be solved, and super dark, like Definitely darker than Heartless Heathens, but still really good. I will say the second book in that series, there is an event that is described in great detail that is horrifying, that I still think about and freaks me out to this day. So just know that going in. But overall, 2 amazing dark romance that are white shoes. And last up is Dark. Like, these books are unbelievably dark. I probably DNF'd these books, or they just really didn't work for me and I rated them pretty low. However, I want to include them because people have different tolerances for dark romances. So although these books were too dark for me, they might work for you. Now, most of these books do involve some form of trafficking, captor captive, just unbelievably dark things. So first up, we have Captive in the Dark. This is a story about a girl who's kidnapped by this guy who is hoping to sell her to another person, and he has to train her, and it's their romance. As you can tell from my face, didn't really work for me. However, I know a few people have really enjoyed it. I believe there's actually multiple books in the series. I've just read the first one. So Captive in the Dark is one. The other one is Tears of Tess. This is following a woman who goes on her honeymoon with her idiot boyfriend or new husband, and they end up being in a very bad area, despite the fact that the woman says, hey, we shouldn't be here. She ends up being captured and sold into a trafficking situation, and it's essentially how one of the people that acquires her ends up not being that bad, and it's their romance. So another one, too dark for me. And then finally, we have probably anything by Lauren Beale, but particularly Along for the Ride and Driving My Obsession are 2 unbelievably dark hitchhiker romances. Along for the Ride is following these 2 serial killer hitchhikers who end up finding this girl and kind of torment her, but also take her along on their killing spree. And then Driving My Obsession is a dark stalker romance, and it is so dark. Think Haunting Adeline, but like 50 times darker. So that one, I had a really hard time finishing. Should have DNF'd it. So just know that. So yeah, there are very, very dark books out there. Too dark for me, but you guys might end up enjoying them. Alright guys, that is my guide to dark romance. Let me know down in the comments, what is your favorite dark romance book? And I'd like to say a huge thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, and Leslie. Thank you guys so much for supporting and watching my channel. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone who has finished this video and watched the entire thing. Hopefully, my voice will be back by the next time I film. But anyway, I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!